In just 89 seconds, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse dismantled the most elaborate corruption scheme in Department of Justice history. The Rhode Island Democrat didn't need to raise his voice or grandstand for the cameras. He simply opened a classified binder and watched as Trump's Attorney General nominee Pam Bondi and her deputy Bove realized their secret partnership had been completely exposed. Cameras captured the exact moment both seasoned prosecutors understood their careers were over. The Senate chamber fell into stunned silence. What did Whitehouse reveal that made two of America's most experienced legal minds collapse simultaneously on live television? It was 11:23 a.m. on a Wednesday when Pam Bondi and Bove entered the Hart Senate office building, believing they were about to sail through the final confirmation hearing. Bondi, Trump's pick for Attorney General, had survived 4 grueling days of Democratic attacks and Republican softballs. Bove, her hand-picked choice for Deputy Attorney General, had been added to today's session as a show of unified leadership for the Justice Department. Their legal teams had wargamed every possible line of attack: campaign finance irregularities, their representation of Trump in criminal cases, their controversial statements about federal prosecutors. But nobody had prepared them for what Senator Whitehouse was carrying in that thick manila folder marked "Confidential, Committee Eyes Only" in blood-red letters. Whitehouse sat quietly in his usual spot on the Senate Judiciary Committee, his silver hair perfectly combed, his wire-rimmed glasses reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights. At 71, the former prosecutor had built a reputation as the Senate's most methodical investigator, the man who could dissect corruption with surgical precision. His presence alone should have terrified Bondi and Bove, but they were too confident in their preparation to notice the trap being set. Bondi took her place at the witness table in her signature navy blue suit, blonde hair immaculate, voice strong and clear. Beside her sat Bove, Trump's former criminal defense attorney, his dark hair slicked back, expensive suit tailored to perfection, radiating the arrogance of someone who believed he had outmaneuvered the system. They looked like the perfect power couple of Trump's Justice Department: experienced, polished, untouchable. The morning session proceeded exactly as scripted. Republican senators praised their qualifications and commitment to law and order. Democrats asked pointed but predictable questions about their loyalty to Trump versus the Constitution. Bondi and Bove answered with practiced ease, their responses coordinated and confident. Everything was going according to plan, until Chairman Grassley's voice cut through the routine proceeding. The chair recognizes Senator Whitehouse for questioning. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Whitehouse stood slowly, adjusting his glasses with deliberate precision. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman." "Ms. Bondi, Bove, you've both spoken extensively about your commitment to ethical leadership at the Department of Justice. I'd like to explore that commitment through the lens of a specific case." Bondi nodded confidently. "We welcome any discussion of our ethical standards, Senator." "Excellent," Whitehouse replied, opening his manila folder with the care of a surgeon making the first incision. "Are either of you familiar with something called Project Justice Shield?" The effect was immediate and devastating. Bondi's confident expression flickered like a light bulb about to burn out. Bove's perfectly composed face went pale, his hand instinctively gripping the edge of the table. Project Justice Shield was their deepest, darkest secret. A conspiracy they believed had been buried so completely it would never see daylight. "I'm not immediately familiar with that specific designation," Bondi said carefully, but her voice had lost its earlier strength. "Of course you're not," Whitehouse said with the ghost of a smile. "Let me provide some context." He pulled out a document and held it up for the cameras. Project Justice Shield was a secret coordination scheme between Trump's legal team and sympathetic prosecutors in state and federal positions. The goal was to undermine prosecutions of Trump associates while advancing politically motivated cases against Democrats. The committee room erupted in gasps and murmurs. Reporters frantically typed on their phones. Republican senators shifted uncomfortably, but Whitehouse continued with relentless calm. "This document is an encrypted communication from Bove to Pam Bondi, dated March 15. Mr. Bove writes, and I quote, "The Atlanta case is problematic but manageable. Our contacts in the Georgia AG's office can slow walk the investigation if Bondi can apply pressure from Florida. We need coordination between friendly AGs to create jurisdictional confusion. Bove looked like he was about to vomit. His hands began trembling visibly. This communication wasn't supposed to exist. It had been sent through encrypted channels that were supposedly impossible to trace. Senator, I don't recall that specific communication, Bove stammered. You don't recall? Whitehouse repeated slowly. Miss Bove, this communication was part of a coordinated effort to obstruct the Georgia election interference investigation. You and Ms. Bondi developed a systematic plan to undermine state prosecutions through interstate coordination. Isn't that correct? Bondi tried to intervene. Senator, you're taking communications out of context. Coordination between state AGs is routine for many legitimate purposes. Legitimate purposes? Whitehouse nodded. Let's explore those legitimate purposes. He pulled out a second document. This is a bank transfer record showing $2.7 million moving from a Trump-affiliated PAC to something called the Constitutional Defense Fund, a fund controlled jointly by you, Ms. Bondi, and you, Mr. Bove. The transfer occurred 2 days after you agreed to coordinate efforts to disrupt the Georgia investigation. The silence in the room was suffocating. Every camera in the building was focused on Bondi and Bove, as they realized their secret financial arrangement had been completely exposed. The Constitutional Defense Fund, Whitehouse continued, was ostensibly created to defend conservative legal principles, but according to these bank records, 87% of the funds were used for personal expenses, luxury travel, private security, even a $140,000 payment for a yacht rental in the Bahamas. How exactly does yacht rental defend constitutional principles? Bondi's breathing became shallow. Bove was sweating profusely despite the air conditioning. They looked at each other with the desperate recognition of co-conspirators watching their conspiracy collapse in real time. We need to consult with our attorneys, Bondi whispered. You need to answer these questions, Whitehouse replied firmly. But let me make this easier for you. This isn't just about financial impropriety. This is about a systematic corruption of American justice. He opened his folder wider and pulled out what appeared to be a thick stack of documents. I have here 47 separate communications between you two, coordinating efforts to obstruct federal investigations, manipulate state prosecutions, and funnel money from political donors into your personal account. You didn't just take bribes. You created an entire shadow justice system designed to protect Donald Trump and enrich yourselves. The impact was devastating. Bondi gripped the table so hard her knuckles went white. Bove was hyperventilating. His perfect composure completely shattered. This communication from April 2023, Whitehouse continued, reading from another document, shows Mr. Bove instructing Ms. Bondi to delay the classified documents referral until after the election. Our people at DOJ can create procedural obstacles. Ms. Bondi responds, already in motion. The delay will cost us $500K, but it's worth it for long-term protection. Each revelation hit like a physical blow. The gallery was in chaos. Senators were shouting over each other. Camera operators pushed forward for better angle, but Whitehouse's voice cut through the noise with surgical precision. You sold justice, he said simply. You took $2.7 million to obstruct investigations into your political patron. You corrupted the Department of Justice from the outside and planned to complete that corruption from the inside. And then came the final blow, the evidence that would destroy them completely. But perhaps most damning is this recording. Whitehouse held up a small digital device. This is a conversation between you two, recorded during a Trump fundraiser in Mar-a-Lago on September. Would you like me to play it for the committee? Bondi and Bove looked at each other with pure terror. They knew exactly what was on that recording. Their most incriminating conversation. The one where they had planned their entire corruption scheme in explicit detail. Please, Senator, Bondi begged, tears forming in her eyes. That recording is taken out of context. Context, Whitehouse said. Let me provide the context. He pressed play on the device. The audio quality was crystal clear, capturing every word of their conspiracy. Bove, we can make millions off this AG appointment if we play it right. Bondi, the key is coordination. We delay Trump's prosecutions while fast-tracking cases against Democrats. Bove, how much do you think we can squeeze from the defense fund? Bondi, $3 million easy, maybe $5 million if we stretch it over 2 years. Bove, perfect. And if anyone asks questions? Bondi, We're defending constitutional principles. No one will dig deeper if we wrap it in patriotic rhetoric. The recording continued for another 30 seconds, detailing their plans to obstruct justice, manipulate prosecutions, and steal millions from political donors. By the time it ended, both Bondi and Bove were sobbing openly. The committee room had descended into absolute chaos. Republican senators were demanding recesses. Democratic senators were calling for immediate criminal referrals. Reporters were rushing toward exits to file breaking news alerts. But the most shocking moment was yet to come. As the full weight of their exposure crashed over them, something unprecedented happened. First Bondi, then Bove, simply collapsed, not metaphorically, literally. The stress, the humiliation, the realization that their lives were over caused both of them to faint simultaneously. Bondi slumped forward onto the witness table. Bove slid sideways out of his chair onto the floor. The cameras captured every second of their dual collapse, the moment when two of Trump's most trusted legal allies were destroyed so completely by the truth that their bodies simply gave up. Medical personnel rushed to the witness table. The hearing was suspended indefinitely, but the damage was irreversible and total. Within hours, both Bondi and Bove had withdrawn from consideration for any government position. By evening, federal prosecutors had announced criminal investigations into conspiracy, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. Within a week, they would both be under indictment. The scheme Whitehouse exposed was even more extensive than initially revealed. Follow-up investigations discovered that Project Justice Shield had corrupted prosecutions in 12 states, delayed dozens of Trump-related investigations, and funneled over $8 million in illegal payments to corrupt prosecutors and attorneys general. But perhaps the most satisfying outcome was the swift justice that followed. 3 months after their collapse in the Senate chamber, both Bondi and Bove pled guilty to federal corruption charges. Bondi was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Bove received 10. The woman who had been considered for the Supreme Court and the man who had defended Trump's most serious crimes were led away in handcuffs, their corruption finally exposed by a senator who understood that some truths are too important to remain hidden. Senator Whitehouse, meanwhile, became a hero to millions of Americans who had watched two corrupt prosecutors finally face consequences for their crimes. His methodical destruction of their conspiracy proved once again that in America, no one, not even those who think they can manipulate the justice system itself, is above the law. The last image America saw of Bondi and Bove was their simultaneous collapse in that Senate chamber, destroyed by 89 seconds of truth they never saw coming. But what happened in the immediate aftermath of their dual breakdown would prove even more devastating than the hearing itself, revealing a corruption network that reached into the highest levels of American government. Within minutes of their collapse, as EMTs worked to revive the unconscious nominees in full view of live television cameras, Whitehouse wasn't finished. While medical personnel attended to Bondi and Bove, the Rhode Island senator calmly opened another section of his classified folder. "Mr. Chairman," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos, "while we wait for the nominees to recover, perhaps I should share what else Project Justice Shield accomplished." The gallery fell silent again. Even the medical team paused their work to listen. Whitehouse had more bombshells, and everyone knew it. This corruption scheme wasn't limited to Bondi and Bove, he continued, pulling out a thick computer printout. According to intercepted communications, Project Justice Shield involved 12 sitting attorneys general, 6 federal prosecutors, and at least 40 private attorneys across the country. The scope was staggering. This wasn't just two corrupt individuals, it was a nationwide conspiracy to manipulate the American justice system. Here's a text message from Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton to Pam Bondi, dated June 3. "Delayed the Trump University case indefinitely. Where's my payment?" Bondi responds, "$200K transferred to your legal defense fund. Thanks for the assist." Each revelation painted a picture of systematic corruption that made Watergate look like a parking violation. Republican senators who had been defending Bondi minutes earlier were now frantically taking notes, realizing they needed to distance themselves immediately. This email chain shows coordination between Bondi's operation and sympathetic federal prosecutors. Whitehouse continued. Acting U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida James Murphy writes, "Can delay the Mar-a-Lago documents case for 6 months if needed.
Will require $500 contribution to my wife's consulting firm. Bove responds, "Done. Wire transfer confirmed." By now, Bondi had regained consciousness, but remained slumped in her chair, tears streaming down her face, as she listened to her conspiracy being exposed in granular detail. Bove was still unconscious, perhaps mercifully spared from hearing the complete destruction of everything he'd worked for. But the most shocking element, Whitehouse said, his voice growing darker, was their plan to weaponize the Justice Department once they took office. He pulled out what appeared to be a detailed organizational chart. This document, created by Emil Bove, outlines their strategy for what they called Operation Clean House, a systematic purge of federal prosecutors, FBI agents and DOJ officials who had investigated Trump or his associates. The plan was breathtaking in its scope and vindictive precision. Names, positions and specific revenge strategies were laid out with corporate efficiency. According to this plan, Whitehouse read, they intended to fire 47 federal employees in their first 90 days, replace them with Trump loyalists, and then launch prosecutions against their own predecessor prosecutor. Jack Smith, Fani Willis, Alvin Bragg, and dozens of others were targeted for what Bove called accountability prosecutions. This wasn't just corruption. It was a planned destruction of American justice itself. The gallery erupted again, but this time with genuine horror at the scope of the conspiracy. Here's an email from Bondi to an unnamed contact at the Heritage Foundation. Once we control DOJ, we can prosecute it us. Jack Smith first, then work down the list. Emil has files on all of them. The revenge fantasy was laid out in black and white. A systematic plan to turn the Justice Department into a weapon of personal vengeance. By this point, several Republican senators were visibly shaken. Senator Susan Collins was seen frantically writing notes. Senator Mitt Romney had his head in his hands. Even Lindsey Graham, Trump's most loyal defender, looked pale and concerned. But perhaps most disturbing, Whitehouse continued, was their plan for what they called the Purification Project. He held up another document, this one marked with Trump's distinctive signature. This memo, signed by Donald Trump and countersigned by both Bondi and Bove, outlines a plan to prosecute journalists, political opponents, and even Supreme Court justices who had ruled against Trump. The document was stunning in its authoritarian scope. Specific targets included Anderson Cooper, Rachel Maddow, Judge Tanya Chutkan, and dozens of others who had crossed Trump during his legal troubles. Each target had a detailed file, Whitehouse explained. Potential charges, evidence-gathering strategies, friendly prosecutors who would handle the cases. They had turned prosecution into a political weapon. At this point, Emil Bove began to regain consciousness, just in time to hear his most secret plans being read aloud to the nation. His eyes opened wide with horror as he realized Whitehouse was reading from documents he thought were encrypted and untraceable. "Mr. Bove," Whitehouse said, noticing his revival, "welcome back. I was just sharing your plans to prosecute Justice Amy Coney Barrett for constitutional treason, because she didn't vote to overturn the 2020 election results." Bove's face went white again. He tried to speak but only managed a strangled whisper. "Those documents are classified. You can't." "Actually, Mr. Bove, these documents were obtained through a federal wiretap, as part of an ongoing FBI investigation into political corruption," Whitehouse replied calmly. "They're evidence in a criminal case, not classified government secret." The revelation that the FBI had been investigating them sent both nominees into visible panic. They had believed their encrypted communications were secure, but the entire conspiracy had been under federal surveillance for months. The wiretaps revealed something else interesting, Whitehouse continued, clearly enjoying his systematic destruction of their conspiracy. "Your plan to assassinate the character, and in some cases, according to these communications, the actual lives of your perceived enemy." He held up a particularly damning document. "This text exchange between you two discusses hiring security contractors to neutralize problems that couldn't be handled through legal channel." When Bove writes, "Some problems require permanent solutions," and Bondi responds, "I know people who handle permanent solutions. What exactly did you mean?" The implication was terrifying. These weren't just corrupt prosecutors. They were potentially violent conspirators willing to use any means necessary to protect Trump and themselves. And here's the smoking gun. Whitehouse said, producing a final document that would end any possibility of their rehabilitation. This is a recorded conversation between Bondi, Bove, and Donald Trump, made in the Lincoln bedroom of the White House on December 7. He pressed play on another digital device. Trump's voice came through clearly. Pam, Emil, I need you to understand. If they come after me, we come after them. If they investigate me, we investigate them. If they prosecute me, we prosecute them. And if they try to put me in jail. The recording paused ominously before Trump continued. Well, let's just say there are other ways to handle problems that can't be solved in courtrooms. Bondi's voice responded. We understand, Mr. President. Emil and I are prepared to use every resource at our disposal. Bove added, legal and extra-legal resources, if necessary. The recording was the final nail in their coffins. It documented a conspiracy that went beyond corruption into the realm of potential violence and domestic terrorism. The committee room erupted in pandemonium. Several senators demanded immediate criminal referrals. Others called for federal marshals to arrest Bondi and Bove immediately. The media presence exploded as reporters realized they were witnessing the exposure of the largest political conspiracy in American history. But Whitehouse wasn't done. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice rising above the chaos. What we've witnessed today isn't just individual corruption. It's a systematic attempt to destroy American democracy itself. He gestured toward the still sobbing Bondi and the shell-shocked Bove. These two individuals, working with dozens of co-conspirators across the country, developed a comprehensive plan to turn our justice system into a weapon of personal and political revenge. They took millions in bribes, obstructed dozens of investigations, and planned to use the Attorney General's office to prosecute their enemies and protect their allies. The room fell silent as the full scope of the conspiracy sank in. They didn't just want to be prosecutors, Whitehouse concluded. They wanted to be dictators. And today, we stopped them. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Within hours, both Bondi and Bove had withdrawn from consideration and retained criminal defense attorney. By evening, the FBI had raided their homes and offices, seizing computers, phones, and documents. Within a week, they were both under federal indictment on charges of conspiracy, racketeering, money laundering, and sedition. The investigation, Whitehouse's revelations, triggered became the largest political corruption case in American history. Over the following months, 12 attorneys general, 6 federal prosecutors, and more than 40 private attorneys were indicted as part of Project Justice Shield. The scheme had corrupted justice systems across the country, costing taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars, and undermining public faith in American law enforcement. But perhaps the most satisfying outcome was the swift justice that followed. In plea bargaining to avoid potential death penalty charges for sedition, both Bondi and Bove provided full cooperation with federal investigators. Their testimony led to additional indictments of Trump associates and revealed corruption networks that investigators had never suspected. 6 months after their collapse in the Senate chamber, both received their sentences. Bondi was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Both received 20. The sentences reflected not just their individual crimes, but their role in what federal judges called an unprecedented attack on American democratic institutions. Donald Trump, implicated by the recordings and testimony, faced his own federal charges related to the conspiracy. The Lincoln bedroom recording became key evidence in his trial for sedition and conspiracy to overthrow the constitutional order. Senator Whitehouse, meanwhile, was hailed as a hero across party lines. His methodical exposure of the conspiracy demonstrated that American institutions, when functioning properly, could still protect democracy from those who would destroy it. The 89 seconds that destroyed Bondi and Bove became a defining moment in American political history, proof that truth, when properly documented and courageously presented, remains more powerful than any conspiracy.